So chances are, if you keep up with the gaming news cycle at all, you likely know about Microsoft trying to acquire Activision Blizzard in the gaming industry's biggest acquisition attempt ever at a $69 billion valuation. And this week, there is a ton of interesting proceedings that are taking place due to the FTC stepping in and trying to essentially shut down this merger altogether. If they are successful, it is claimed that Microsoft may just walk away from the deal entirely. Well, you probably know this primarily has to do with Microsoft versus PlayStation and PlayStation's concerns around what will happen to their bottom line and revenue if this deal goes through. However, interestingly, Nintendo has been dragged into the conversation, and you may remember they were previously a part of this conversation because there is a signed legal binding agreement between Nintendo and Microsoft that Call of Duty will be headed to the Switch or next-gen Nintendo hardware, depending on when this thing closes and wraps up, for the next 10 years. Basically, the long and short of it is Call of Duty will be supported on Nintendo hardware for at least 10 years following the completion of this merger if it is successful. That is something that I looked at and saw as a win for Nintendo gamers, not to mention the fact that Phil Spencer has been very vocal about trying to revitalize various IP that Activision Blizzard own that have essentially fallen by the wayside, name dropping games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which I've been a huge fan of my entire life growing up from a child to now. I still enjoy the most recent remake of 1+2. He name dropped games like Guitar Hero that, while they were oversaturated on the market at one point in time, we've now kind of overcorrected that and we just don't see them at all anymore, and that may be on the table for bringing it back to all platforms. I am a fan of the idea of Microsoft having a broader scope for Activision Blizzard games and not just so solely focused on that one cash cow Call of Duty, like we saw the Tony Hawk team Vicarious Visions essentially dissolved into a Activision Blizzard support team due to the lack of resources that they have, and Microsoft can bring in a lot of those, and they play very nice with Nintendo, and that is good news for us Nintendo gamers at the end of the day. But interestingly, the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, has made some remarks that kind of show, I would say, the disconnect that I think you can safely say these regulatory bodies have from what is really going on in the gaming industry. As you can see, the following article posted up over on Nintendo Life, which reads, "The FTC doesn't seem to think Switch is a serious PlayStation and Xbox competitor. Microsoft's Phil Spencer says it's incorrect." Microsoft is currently locked in a courtroom battle with the Federal Trade Commission over its proposed $69 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard, and although the focus is mostly on Xbox, on day 2 of the proceedings, the Nintendo Switch has already been dragged into the fight. According to The Verge, the FTC has been attempting to argue that the Switch is very different to the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, suggesting it's not really a part of the same market by comparing its technical capabilities with lines about its frame rate and how it compares in terms of GPU teraflops. As highlighted by the source, Microsoft head of gaming and Xbox chief Phil Spencer didn't seem to agree, noting how it's incorrect for the FTC to say Nintendo isn't a competitor when it still occupies the same industry and even hosts the same and similar third-party content. Essentially, the FTC is claiming Nintendo won't be impacted by the acquisition like PlayStation. Microsoft has already penned 10-year deals with a number of parties, including Nintendo, to host Call of Duty on their respective platforms if the acquisition is passed. Sony chose not to sign. This would arguably reinforce the fact Nintendo and the Switch is still very much in the same market as Sony and Xbox, even if it pivots. Factoring in sales, the Switch has absolutely dominated the video game hardware space since its arrival in 2017, with more than 125 million units sold as of March 2023, and software sales surpassing the 1 billion mark in May of this year. So the hybrid system supporting both consoles and handheld play certainly appears to be a competitor in this space, even if Nintendo chooses not to directly compete with the high-end specs and games on Microsoft and Sony systems. Back in April of this year, UK CMA suggested the Switch was not technically capable of running Call of Duty games, which is definitely amusing to hear when considering just how many impossible ports have been released during the Switch's lifetime. many of Nintendo's past systems, including the Wii U, have had Call of Duty games as well. So I personally found this article fascinating, as one of the bodies that could potentially block this deal looks at the Nintendo Switch on the current gaming market that we see today, competing against the Xbox Series X and S and the Sony PlayStation 5, and they are blatantly stating that Nintendo's not competition to these consoles. They're not in the same space, when clearly you can look around and see that they are. They are competing for that slice of the gamer market, and while Nintendo went about it a different way with a technically less impressive piece of hardware, they also tackled that mobile gameplay need that a lot of gamers have, where you might be playing on your TV, but you just want to go on the road or go out somewhere and you want to be able to continue your game, especially for people who travel frequently. The Switch is a true game changer. They had that hybrid form factor in mind, and inherently that does limit some of the graphical capability, but to say that they're not a competitor to Xbox or PlayStation is clearly not reading the room. They're even competing in the subscription market now with things like Nintendo Switch Online, which is vastly successful for them, and you see services like PlayStation Plus and Xbox Game Pass all trying to capture that monthly reoccurring revenue stream that gamers are willing to pay when the value is there, and Nintendo is in that same space. Now, I think you can argue that Nintendo, because they target the market so differently, that they're not necessarily that head-to-head only one competitor can win, like a Sony Microsoft situation where Sony and Microsoft would rather each other not exist. If one of those guys could win out and be the top console provider on power and on all of these major AAA games that push the boundaries of what's possible from a graphical capability standpoint, they would love to see that happen if one went down and not the other. Now, Nintendo, on the other hand, can coexist alongside of these companies, but they're clearly still trying to be the choice for somebody spending their hard-earned money on video game hardware. And if you're somebody who only has one console and you don't buy multiple, you probably go to your local retailer and, based off what games are available on said platform, make that decision between a PlayStation, an Xbox, and a Nintendo Switch. And the FTC can't quite seem to figure that out, and that is baffling to me for these kind of statements to be unfolding when we have a massive merger that will impact the gaming industry in a huge way, and these people are the same people who could potentially block and shut down the entire deal. Now, you could be for or against this merger ultimately going through. I definitely think that Microsoft owning Activision Blizzard is better than the alternative, with them just remaining as their own individual entity or potentially being bought up by somebody else. I think that with Xbox's current leader, Phil Spencer, they are likely to work together very nicely with Nintendo, and as mentioned, make it a win-win situation for us Nintendo gamers, and potentially some of those long-beloved classic Activision Blizzard franchises that have been all but forgotten about and discontinued. We may have a shot to see those come back and see Nintendo Switch versions of those games, if not Nintendo Switch 2 by the time this thing is all wrapped up. There are also some more direct comments from Phil Spencer at this FTC battle that he believes not only can they get Call of Duty looking and running great on the Switch, but he believes that they can do so with better performance than other Switch games that are currently being sold on the market. And I do believe that with the number of impossible ports we see make it to the platform, that they can pull it off if they give it the development dollars and time that it needs. And by time we're talking about new next-gen Nintendo hardware and Call of Duty, you might be able to play your favorite Modern Warfare 3 or Warzone 2 or whatever is out and be able to take it on the go when you're traveling. And then if you're a multi-console gamer, when you're back home, you boot it up on your PlayStation or Xbox. I think this is a win for everybody at the end of the day, and we will have to wait and see what ultimately happens at the end of this trial and whether or not Microsoft is successful. But I do think that the FTC and the case that they're making seems to be kind of falling apart right in front of them. So I really want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, your personal thoughts and opinions on the stance of the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, going out and saying that Nintendo Switch isn't a competitor to PlayStation and Xbox. Do you think that entire board is made up of people that just don't understand the gaming space and that's really where this is coming from? Or are they just so anti this merger going through, that they're painting any picture they can to try to shut it down, because a lot of their arguments have just been very pro PlayStation so far. And who do you think will ultimately win out in this trial? And do you think it's a good thing for Nintendo gamers, like I tend to see it, if this thing ultimately goes through and is successful? Or do you think it somehow harms the gaming industry on a broader spectrum than what we're seeing in terms of the facts that have been presented to us so far? So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch the weekend video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.